I, 30-year-old female, was named after my deceased grandmother, Phyllis, whom I never got the chance to meet. She was the matriarch of my dad's side, and her death left a great impact. I was the first child in the family born after her death. My mom says she really didn't want to name me this, but my dad strong-armed her. This name has been difficult for me in a number of ways. My dad refused to let me go by a nickname all throughout my childhood. The other kids still found ways to mock me, such as calling me Phil and telling me I had a boy's name. Then in my teens, they'd ask me if I wanted to be Philled. Now, I know kids can find anything to tease people with, but it certainly didn't help. The larger reason it was hard is I felt like I had to live up to a ghost. It doesn't help I looked just like her. I was constantly reminded of the legacy I had to live up to. Anytime I made a mistake, I was told I needed to uphold the honor of the name. Keep in mind, I have always listened to my dad's stories, learned about the history, and I greatly appreciate that I was named after someone so amazing. And I tell my dad this, even though I say I'm not a fan of the name. In college, I decided to reinvent myself and began going by Lissa. In time, people began to assume my name was Alyssa, and I just went with it, to the point that's all my friends, colleagues, etc. called me this. My family was aware, but would still call me Phyllis, which I accepted for the time. My dad made his disappointment clear, but I told him all that mattered is he got to call me it. I also explained why the name was difficult to me several times, both growing up and as an adult, and he told me the meaning behind it was greater than bullies, and that I should be honored to have such a legacy. I got married last fall, and it was an issue for my dad that the officiant called me Alyssa. That Alyssa was written on all the wedding decorations and invitations. When I went to hyphenate my last name with my husband's, I also chose to legally change my name to Alyssa. I had my grandmother's middle name as well, my whole life, and I kept that as it was never an issue. It's Marie, for those curious. The issue for my dad is that his family has grown used to calling me Alyssa. I never asked them to, but they chose to do so. My dad has said that I was wrong to change my name and that I should feel honored. I tried to explain my reasoning, and he said it hurt him that I didn't care enough. I got mad and said I cared enough to respect him calling me Phyllis and never correcting him. I respected him by always validating his feelings and never telling him he was wrong, while he always brushed mine off. But if he wanted the truth, I wasn't born to be a reincarnation of his mother. I am my own person, and it's not fair for him to put his grief on me. This really upset him. My mom said I pushed it too far by saying all of that. I feel bad he's upset, but I don't know if I agree I was wrong. Am I the idiot? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot. Your dad is a jerk, and frankly, he is lucky you haven't told him to sod off and cut him off, given how completely he disregards your feelings every chance he gets. Who cares if your grandma was a saint, the most beautiful woman, a queen, or whatever? The point is, you don't like the name, and as it is your name, you can decide what you want to be called. That he keeps choosing this as his hill to die on, and your mom backing him up, shows how entitled his attitude is and his utter lack of empathy for all you've endured with that name. Comment 2. Not the idiot. Your dad needed therapy, not a daughter to replace his mother. He comes off as a bit toxic and quite self-absorbed, and your mother comes off as an enabler. I would go low contact with him if he keeps bothering you. But I hope what you said was a wake-up call to him. Now for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the comments on my last post. It's been a wild couple of weeks, and I've got quite the update for you. After the blowout with my dad, things were tense. I mean, you could cut the tension with a knife whenever we were in the same room. My mom, ever the peacemaker, tried to get us to talk it out, but my dad was having none of it. He was hurt, and I get that, but I was standing my ground. Now let's rewind a bit. Growing up, my dad had this ritual where he'd tell me stories about Grandma Phyllis, how she'd volunteer at the soup kitchen every Thanksgiving, how she'd won the town's gardening competition 3 years in a row, and how she was the glue that held the family together. I soaked up these stories, feeling the weight of her legacy on my shoulders. It was like I was living in her shadow, trying to be the granddaughter she never met. Back to the present. My dad's brother, Uncle Mike, reached out to me. He's always been the cool uncle, the one who'd sneak me an extra slice of cake at family gatherings. He said he understood both sides and suggested a family dinner, a neutral ground where we could all talk without the pressure. I agreed, thinking it couldn't hurt. The night of the dinner, I was nervous. I hadn't seen my dad since our argument, and I wasn't sure how he'd react. But when I walked in, there he was, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. We all sat down, and Uncle Mike kicked things off by reminiscing about Grandma Phyllis. But this time, the stories were different. He talked about her flaws, her mistakes, and how she wasn't perfect. It was like he was giving me permission to be human. Then came the jaw-dropping moment. My dad, with tears in his eyes, admitted that he'd been holding on to me as his connection to his mom. He said he realized that by forcing her name on me, he was trying to keep her alive. But in doing so, he was ignoring the person I was. It was the first time I'd seen my dad so vulnerable. We talked for hours, and I learned things about my dad I never knew, like how he struggled with his mom's death, how he felt lost without her guidance, and how naming me after her was his way of coping. It was a side of him I'd never seen, and it made me understand his actions a bit more. Now here's the compromise we came up with. My dad agreed to start calling me Alyssa, but he asked if he could have one thing that still had my birth name on it. He'd been working on a family tree, tracing our roots back generations, and he wanted to include my birth name there as a nod to Grandma Phyllis. I thought about it, and it felt like a fair trade. I agreed on the condition that it was just for the family tree and nowhere else. The rest of the family was supportive, and even my mom, who'd been caught in the middle, breathed a sigh of relief. It was like a weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. But wait, there's more. The next day, my dad showed up at my house with a small box. Inside was Grandma Phyllis's old gardening hat, the one she wore when she won all those competitions. He said he wanted me to have it, not as a reminder of the name I didn't want, but as a symbol of growth and new beginnings. I was touched, and for the first time in a long time, I felt connected to my grandmother in a way that was mine, not just a reflection of my dad's memories. So things are better now. Not perfect, but better. My dad's been making an effort, slipping up with my name occasionally, but he corrects himself. And I've been trying to be more understanding of his feelings, too. It's a process, but we're getting there. My son's wife tossed out Abby's albums, so I confronted her. The grandkids spilled the truth, and she's about to regret it. I lost my daughter Abby 7 years ago. She was married to Scott and had 3 children with him who are now 11, 12, and 14. Scott and my grandkids stayed part of the family, and last year Scott remarried. His current wife is Beth. We all knew Beth for a few years prior to the wedding, and she was always very friendly. Though at times she could be a little pushy. Scott would always handle that, though. After they got married, Beth's pushiness got worse, and Scott appears to have lost control. Beth was upset when she dropped my grandkids off one day that we had not added photos of her to our house and commented as such. In our living room, we have a display with photos of our kids and their weddings. She felt her and Scott's wedding should be there. She was upset when my grandkids spent Mother's Day with us and our extended family, and we did not include her. Scott wasn't invited either. Mother's Day is a difficult day for him due to a bad relationship with his own mother. But Beth said we should invite her too because she's part of the family, and then she said she's one of our kids too. I asked her what she meant, and she told me she is obviously going to be one of our kids now that she's the mother figure for our grandkids. I told Scott what she said, and he was embarrassed and told me he would speak to her. Beth was also upset when my husband posted on Facebook to say something about our kids, and she didn't get mentioned as one of our kids. But as Scott's wife, we mentioned Scott and how wonderful he was to Abby, and how wonderful he is as a father. For my grandson's 14th birthday, we were all together, and he wanted a mom's side photo. Beth attempted to get into the photo, and when Scott tried to remind her, she said she's part of the family now. He pulled her aside, and the photo was taken without her, but she told one of my sons after that she felt like we weren't treating her as a daughter, and then said Scott never treated her as a lesser wife. We saw them a little over Christmas, and Beth was upset that we got them a joint gift for her and Scott instead of getting her one alone. She told me she's tired of feeling like she's not really family, and she said she feels like we always put Abby first when she's here now. I saw red after this, and I told her she can never take my daughter's place, and the fact she ever thought she could is outrageous. She told me the kids call her mom, and they think the world of her, so why wouldn't we? I told her the kids have always called her Beth when I hear them, and she turned around and said that's our fault because the kids should be calling her mom, and they don't. She lost it from there. Beth stormed out, and I explained what happened to Scott. He apologized and left the kids with us so he could speak to her. I think they worked it out, but Beth said I was needlessly cruel to imply she's not as good as Abby, and doesn't deserve to be our daughter. Am I the idiot? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. She told me the kids call her mom and they think the world of her, so why wouldn't we? I told her the kids have always called her Beth when I hear them, and she turned around and said that's our fault, because the kids should be calling her mom and they don't. She lost it from there. The way OP checked Beth with this receipt nearly caused me to spit my drink out. Not the idiot. Comment 2. Not the idiot. Having 2 daughters, I can't imagine how painful it was for you to lose yours. Even if years have passed, it's still the greatest loss for a parent. So yes, Beth's behavior is extremely intrusive and inappropriate. I would have a word with Scott to make sure that in their home, Beth respects the children's wishes if they don't want to call her mother. Now, for the update. Hey Reddit, it's been 3 days since I last posted about the situation with my son-in-law's wife, Beth, and things have escalated in ways I couldn't have imagined. Buckle up, because this update is a rough ride. First off, let me give you a bit of history. My daughter Abby was the glue that held our family together. She had this warmth about her that just drew people in. Losing her was like losing the sun from our sky. Scott, her husband, was devastated, but he's been an incredible father to their kids. When he married Beth, we all hoped for a new beginning, but it's been anything but smooth. So, after the blow-up over the Christmas gift, things seemed to calm down a bit. Scott had a long talk with Beth, and we thought maybe, just maybe, things would settle. But boy, were we wrong. 2 days ago, I got a call from my 12-year-old granddaughter, Lily, in tears. She told me Beth had thrown out all of Abby's photo albums. I was floored. Those albums were precious to us, especially to the kids. I rushed over to their house, and there was Beth, standing in the driveway with a smug look on her face, as if she had just won some sort of twisted game. Scott was at work, so I confronted Beth myself. I asked her how she could do something so heartless. She just shrugged and said, "Out with the old, in with the new." I couldn't believe it. I gathered the albums from the trash, some of them damaged, and took them home. My hands were shaking with anger. When Scott came home and found out, he was livid. He and Beth had a huge argument, the kind that makes the walls shake. The kids were at my place, thank goodness, but they could hear the yelling from down the street when they walked home. Scott slept in the guest room that night, and the house was like a cold war zone. Yesterday, during a family dinner at our place, without Beth, who refused to come, my oldest grandson, Jake, dropped a bombshell. He said Beth had been pressuring him and his siblings to call her mom. He was uncomfortable with it, and so were his sisters. We were all taken aback. Abby was their mom, and no one could replace her. I decided to have a talk with Scott about it. He was already on edge, but when I brought it up, he broke down. He admitted he felt trapped between honoring Abby's memory and trying to make Beth feel included. He confessed that he had been avoiding dealing with Beth's behavior because he was scared of being alone again. Today, the misunderstanding happened. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Beth. She was all smiles, acting like nothing had happened. She started chatting about how she and Scott were planning to renew their vows. I was confused and asked why so soon. She laughed and said, "Well, we want to start fresh, and besides, the kids need to see us united as a family." I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and quickly finished my shopping. When I got home, I called Scott to ask about the vow renewal. He was silent for a moment, then said, "That's not happening. We're actually talking about separation." Turns out, Beth had overheard Scott talking to his brother about a possible separation and assumed it was about renewing their vows. She had been telling people about their new beginning without even discussing it with Scott. My niece's lies tore our family apart, so I exposed her, but she played the victim. Now she's broken alone, and the truth is, my 32-year-old female, sister Sue, 39-year-old female, and her husband Dan, 44-year-old male, have 2 kids, Lily, 11-year-old female, and Amy, 16-year-old female. Recently, Dan's mom broke a leg. She lived alone, so Dan and Sue took her in. She got Amy's bedroom. Amy moved in with Lily. Late on the 25th, Amy showed up at my apartment, begging me to let her stay. She said it's too much. She has zero privacy. Lily's constantly going through her things, takes clothes without asking, breaks stuff, is so loud that Amy can't do anything, and when Amy complains, her parents just tell her to be patient. The final straw was when Lily found a present with a note for Amy from a guy from her class. Lily loudly announced Amy was in love and started reading the note to their parents. No one knew about him yet, and the note was obviously personal, nothing inappropriate, so Amy tried to take it from her. The result was her sister startling and Dan yelling at Amy to let go of her. Amy grabbed the note and ran out of the house straight to me. I live close by. I was at a loss. I said I'd talk to her parents for her and called Sue to let her know Amy was safe and to get her side. Sue asked to come over, but Amy didn't want to see anyone. So Sue said to tell her sorry and that she could stay the night. The day after, we agreed Sue would come alone to talk to Amy. 20 minutes later, she shows up with Dan and Lily. Lily apologized to Amy through tears, asking her not to hate her. Amy accepted but looked uncomfortable. Dan then told Amy to apologize for grabbing Lily, but she refused. Dan said she had to for them to get along, but Amy said she still didn't want to go home. After that, the screaming started. Dan called Amy a spoiled brat. He never had his own room. Amy said if she can't stay here, she'll go to friends and stop talking to all of us. Lily kept crying and Sue just ignored everything until Dan declared they needed to get back home to his mom and tried to push Amy out the door. Sue broke them apart and said Dan should take Lily home. She'd handle it. She told Amy she'd make Lily act nicer and asked if that changed anything. Amy said no, so Sue said okay, she can stay. No clue what she told Dan, but it didn't work because he keeps calling and texting. He says I'm basically kidnapping Amy and enabling her emotional blackmail, that I'm teaching her if she runs, she'll get whatever she wants, that it's not a big deal to share, and Lily apologized and is feeling terrible, that Amy is disrespecting his injured mom by not letting her have her room, that I'm interfering in a private matter by giving Amy an out, undermining his authority just because Sue is my sister. Sue says she's trying, but I doubt it. Dan even showed up at my apartment demanding to talk to Amy. He refused to leave, so I let him in, but Amy locked herself in the bathroom until he left, threatening to call the cops next time. I'm keeping a kid from her dad, which is messed up, but I worry where Amy will go if I kick her out. Reconciliation seems far away with all that screaming. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot. You are keeping a kid safe from her very angry father. It's clear Dan is used to shouting his way to decisions. I don't know how this situation is going to be resolved, but if your sister cannot stand up to her husband, there are deeper issues here. Comment 2. Not the idiot. Dan is hurtful, and Lily is clearly the golden child. My heart hurts for Amy, and I hope she can get out of that situation ASAP. Now for the update. A lot has happened since I last posted about my niece Amy's situation. I've been in the middle of a family drama that's been escalating by the minute. After the confrontation at my apartment, things seemed to calm down for a brief moment. Sue had promised to make things right, but the peace was short-lived. Dan's persistence in trying to get Amy back home was relentless. He bombarded my phone with messages, each one more accusatory than the last. He claimed I was tearing the family apart, that I was the reason Amy was acting out. Sue, on the other hand, was caught between her husband and her daughter. She had always been the mediator, the one who smoothed things over. But this time, it was different. The strain was visible on her face every time she came over to talk to Amy, trying to negotiate some kind of truce. Amy, meanwhile, was a mix of emotions. She was grateful to have a space at my place, but the guilt of causing a rift was eating at her. She missed her sister Lily, even though she was the cause of all this. She missed her room, her privacy, and the normalcy of her old life. But she couldn't face going back, not with the way things were. The heartbreak came 2 days ago. Dan had shown up unannounced again, this time with a different tactic. He brought Lily with him, hoping that seeing her sister would soften Amy. Lily was in tears, begging Amy to come back home. She said she missed her sister, that she was sorry for everything. Amy's resolve crumbled. She agreed to go back, but with conditions. She wanted her room back, and she wanted Dan to respect her privacy. Dan agreed, reluctantly, but it was clear he wasn't happy. That night, Sue called me, her voice shaking. She confessed that Dan had been having an affair. She had found out just before Amy ran away, and it had been the reason for her own distraction and lack of support for Amy. She had been trying to deal with the betrayal, all while keeping the family together. I was stunned. The man who had been preaching about family values and respect had been living a lie. Sue was heartbroken, and now so was Amy. The revelation that her father was not who she thought he was shattered her. The next day, Amy came back to my apartment. She said she couldn't stay in that house, not with the lies and the hypocrisy. She felt betrayed by her father, and she couldn't look at him the same way. Dan's reaction was explosive. He accused Sue of turning his children against him, of poisoning their minds. He said that the affair was a mistake, that he was going to end it, but the damage was done. Sue was now staying at a friend's place, trying to figure out her next steps. Lily was confused and hurt, not understanding why her family was falling apart. And Amy, she was angry and lost, her trust in her father broken. I've been doing my best to support them, but it's hard. I'm not a parent. I'm just the aunt who got caught in the middle of a family falling apart. I'm trying to be there for Amy, to give her the stability she needs. But with every angry call from Dan, with every tearful visit from Sue, I feel like I'm in over my head. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.